Have you ever noticed that some paranormal investigators, especially the ones on television, don't always get a peaceful ending? Some face sudden illness, some fall apart emotionally, some spiral into addiction, and some don't come home at all. Tonight, we're stepping into the side of paranormal investigation that rarely gets talked about, not in interviews, not at conventions, and definitely not on the shows themselves. The tragedies, the breakdowns, the deaths, and the investigators who spent years confronting the dark until something finally pushed back. We're looking at Dan Rivera, Mark and Debby Constantino, Father Andrew Calder, Ryan Buell, Zach Bagans. And at the end, I'll share my own thoughts on how a person's investigative style, especially when it involves provocation or aggressive confrontation, might play a deeper role in these outcomes than most people want to believe. So settle in. Tonight, we're pulling back the curtain on the investigators who paid a price for chasing the dead. So I'm going to start off with Dan Rivera. This story is a recent one. Dan was well known within Nesper as the investigator who took the hardest cases, the ones involving aggression, attachments, or energy that felt heavy before you even walked through the door. In the months leading up to his death, his schedule was relentless. Tours, conventions, overnight investigations, long drives from state to state, and live streams that went late into the night. Teammates said Dan had started looking drained in a way sleep doesn't fix, especially after a string of darker cases that had become more emotionally volatile. His final stop was a location where activity had reportedly been escalating week after week. The next morning, he was found deceased in his hotel room. No signs of distress, no warning, just silence. Now, afterwards, it was stated that Dan did have, I believe it was a heart attack. It was a heart issue. Now, that's not to say that, you know, something more paranormal or negative wasn't the cause, or maybe it was the cause, or a combination of both. For many in the field, it was a frightening reminder that exhaustion, spiritual and physical, can accumulate quietly until something finally gives. On a side note, Dan Rivera, before his death, and this was actually, he was at a location at the time, um, on tour with the Annabelle doll. It was said that he was Annabelle's main caretaker at the time. If you're not familiar with the Annabelle doll, you can Google it. Annabelle doll is the one from the movies, from the Warren's Case Files, Ed and Lorraine Warren, who were paranormal investigators. Annabelle was taken on tour. She was left in the box that she's kept in, which the Warrens had blessed on a regular basis when she was in their occult museum. Some people attribute Dan's death perhaps to Annabelle. There have been other events that have happened when people have been around Annabelle on tour. I just wanted to add in that little side note. So now I'm going to move on to Mark and Debby Constantino. They were widely respected as pioneers in EVP research, which is electronic voice phenomena. Their sessions were intense, hours in pitch black rooms, addressing spirits directly, pushing for clearer and clearer responses. They brought home tremendous amounts of audio, hundreds of files filled with whispers, growls, cries, and voices that left even seasoned investigators uneasy. Mark and Debbie Constantino were on the show Ghost Adventures. That is the one with Zach Bagans. I watched them on there many times myself because I've always been drawn to EVP research as opposed to, video, photographs, that type of thing. So I myself was watching them quite often. This was back when I watched a lot of the shows that are on TV that are about paranormal investigations. But people close to them said that their house felt charged as if activity from their cases had bled over into their personal space. And as their EVP work became darker and more confrontational, their personal lives unraveled. Restraining orders, explosive arguments, emotional instability. Friends noticed a shift in their energy, a heaviness that seemed to grow alongside the intensity of their work. In 2015, everything ended in a horrific murder-suicide after Mark abducted their daughter, killed Debbie's roommate, and ultimately took both of their lives during a police standoff. Their tragedy became one of the most unsettling reminders that prolonged confrontational spirit communication can take a toll far beyond what viewers see on camera. Now, do we know that their paranormal work, on television, perhaps maybe off television as well, had something to do with what happened with them? No, there's no proof. There never will be. Um, I think, and I'll share my thoughts in a little bit here. I think when it comes to the shows on television, and especially if the investigators are provoking more negative entities, I think it can take a toll on your entire life, physically, mentally, all of that. Uh, and that energy can accumulate, within the person's life. Um, do I blame that specifically for what happened with Debbie and Mark Constantino? No, because I can't. I don't have proof. I just have my own thoughts, and theories. So now I'm going to move on to Father Andrew Calder. He was frequently featured on the show Paranormal State, which was started by Ryan Buell. I'll be talking about him next. But Father Andrew Calder was one of a few clergy members who willingly stepped into cases involving alleged demonic presence. Families called him when they believed something inhuman was inside their home, and Calder rarely turned anyone away. He stayed overnight with clients. He prayed through the night and performed deliverance rituals until he was physically shaking from exhaustion. Crew members said that after the exorcisms, Calder sometimes looked like he had aged years overnight. Over time, he developed a rapid, aggressive autoimmune disease that doctors struggled to fully explain. Those who knew him believed his health decline was tied to years of spiritual warfare, both the emotional strain and the physical toll. He passed away in 2012 at just 52 years old, leaving behind a quiet but powerful legacy and a haunting warning about the cost of fighting darkness up close. And in 2012, I remember I followed Father Andrew Calder on social media. And I remember seeing the post of him in the hospital that were done um, by someone close to him. And I wondered, what's going on with, Father Andrew Calder. When I saw him on the show, I liked to watch him. I liked his personality. I liked how he handled the cases and what he was doing. Um, so this one was kind of it was sad for me. Because he was only 52 years old. Way too young, for someone to pass away, especially someone like him who, was trying to help people, devoted what he did to that cause. And so him in particular, that was it was kind of when I think at that point that's when I started thinking about, the toll that this can take on people who are publicly doing this, on televised shows. So now I'm going to move on to Ryan Buell. As I said before, he was the host of Paranormal State. He had a paranormal team. I believe he still has that. I'm not positive. Uh, but he pushed his team into some of the darkest cases ever aired on television. Former cast members described chaotic filming schedules, emotionally distressed clients, constant travel, and a pattern of demonic centered episodes that grew more aggressive as the show continued. That is true because I watched that show. I always had a lot of respect for Ryan and the things that he said, and how he moved forward, when he in talking to the clients, that type of thing. Some said that Ryan would return from certain investigations noticeably changed, withdrawn, irritable, or emotionally overwhelmed. After the show ended, Ryan's life spiraled into addiction, paranoia, undelivered tour dates, legal issues, and behavior that shocked fans who had once seen him as thoughtful and grounded. The contrast was so dramatic that many who worked with him believe something fractured during those early years, something deeper than stress or fame. He has since retreated into a quieter life, but the shadow of those investigations still follow him. I'm not sure I would say it's a quieter life. He's still in the public eye. He was on the Annabelle tour with Dan Rivera, I might add. Um, he does do, paranormal centered events. Uh, I follow him on social media. He back in those years when he was faced with addiction, he did go to rehab. He has been sober for, I believe, 8 years or so. Don't quote me on that. um, but he has turned his life around. He's doing much better now. But I did watch that show a lot. He even had Lorraine Warren on there on a lot of the cases. She would go in there as a, psychic medium. And again, a lot of those cases were, more negative in nature. Okay, I'll say that. So last, I'm going to talk about Zach Bagans. He's probably the most well-known paranormal investigator on TV at this point. Many are familiar with the show Ghost Adventures. So he's built an entire career on provoking spirits. Yes, I said that. Calling out spirits, challenging entities, isolating himself in dangerous locations, and interacting with cursed objects that most investigators refuse to touch. His methods are bold, theatrical, and undeniably risky. He also owns a haunted museum in Las Vegas. It's very well known. Probably thousands of people go there, every year. He has many, many items that they're not great. you know, you can look it up for yourself. He often buys items related to serial killers. He has items that, are more cursed items, as he would say. Um, so it's almost like Zach is constantly surrounded by that type of energy between the museum and filming for his show. Now he has other shows that he does besides Ghost Adventures. So with him, it's almost like he's surrounded quite a bit by, more negative types of energies. So, behind the scenes, his crew has described unexplained illnesses, emotional shifts, and equipment malfunctions so violent they left people shaken. During the Demon House investigation, which is the haunting of the Ammons family, there is a documentary on Netflix, by the way. Uh, I believe it's called The Demon House. I've watched it. Um, he purchased a house that was known for, you know, um, severe issues, possession issues type of thing. Um, I won't elaborate on that, now. Maybe I'll do a separate episode on it. I'm not sure. um, but he bought the house because he wanted to make a documentary and he wanted to, I believe, do different shows and that type of thing, in this house. It ended up being so bad for him and other people who were in that house that he had the house demolished. So the house is no longer standing. During the Demon House investigation, several team members quit permanently, and Zach himself developed long term neurological and vision problems doctors couldn't fully explain. If you've ever noticed, if you watch him, the glasses that he wears now, um, that is the reason for those glasses. They are different than the ones that he's worn years ago. I'm not even sure. Did he wear glasses years ago? I don't even think he did. But the vision problems the doctors could not fully explain. Even his museum staff at his museum reports sickness, exhaustion, and uncharacteristic mood swings after working near certain artifacts. Zach has hinted at the toll over the years, but it doesn't take much digging to see it. You cannot continuously provoke, whatever is out there without something eventually leaving a mark. And this is going to lead into my personal thoughts. So when you line up all of these stories, and I'm sure there's stories and people out there, the people that aren't well known that I've never heard of. Maybe you have. If you have, leave a comment down below. The illnesses, the breakdowns, the tragedies, it all stops feeling like a coincidence to me. And for years, um, I've always wondered about this. Back, during the time, Andrew Calder, the Constantinos, and that's when I started thinking like, what's going on here? Why are the people on these shows going through these things? People lost their lives. And I started to wonder, about the reason for that. Now, they could just be natural occurring events. That's true. Um, but I don't necessarily feel that's 100% of the cause. Um, so the work that they're doing, it isn't just visiting haunted places, it's exposing yourself to trauma, grief, emotional residue over and over again. And when the investigators use aggression or they provoke the spirits, they're stepping into something more like a confrontation than communication. I believe the energy you engage with responds to the way you approach it. I've always felt this way. I've always led my investigations this way. I have never provoked anything. I have no desire to provoke. If you spend years yelling into the dark, eventually something yells back. It's not always immediate, it's not always obvious. Sometimes the consequences show up months later or years later in your health, your mind, your relationships, and your spirit. You can't live in darkness every weekend and come out untouched. And the investigators we talked about tonight, most of them walked right into the shadows with cameras rolling and stayed there longer than any person should. I will also add that the television shows, the producers, the networks, they want the paranormal shows to be exciting and thrilling and scary and dramatic. That's why you'll hear them like, "Oh, did you hear that? What was that?" Um, because if it's the shows aren't like that, who's going to watch? Now, way back, the very first episode of Ghost Adventures, I believe it was the first episode, correct me if I'm wrong, might have to look it up after this. I should have done it before this. Ghost Adventures, the first episode, or one of the first, I remember it was, I believe, the Goldfield Hotel. I'd never seen them before. They're brand new on this show. And I watched. The difference in that show and the shows now, it's like night and day. The show was a bit boring, but it was true to nature of actual paranormal investigation. Most times when you go into a location, especially if it's a house, unless the house has extreme things going on, it's very quiet. You're sitting, you're listening, you're doing your research with cameras, with recorders, with video, and it's not something that most people would want to watch. They'd probably get bored. So when I was running my paranormal group, I was contacted once by the Maury Povich show. Of all shows, it was the Maury Povich show. And they had found they had found the website online, and it was late summer. They wanted a show, of course, for something to air for Halloween. A lot of times radio stations, TV stations, they'll have special shows on around the time of Halloween. So I remember a producer contacted me by email and said, "Hey, we'd be interested in having you on the show. Do you have any great evidence that we could feature?" And I said, "Yeah, we've got tons of EVPs. We have tons of, electronic voice phenomena, class A EVPs, which are class A. That is the best categorization for that EVP, where everybody hears what it is. They hear what's being said. It's clear. You're not questioning it." And so I had replied to the producer and I said, "Yeah, we have lots of EVPs. We don't really have much on video. We have a few things, a few pictures. Most of our great stuff is audio." And they said, "Oh, okay, we were really looking for something really scary, some scary, video, that type of thing." So, you know, we didn't do the show, obviously. But I wasn't upset about it because I don't want to fake anything. I don't want to add drama. Um, that's not me. And I truly believe that in some cases especially with these people who are on television, this is their livelihood. If they don't, do what's asked of them, they wouldn't have a show. Plain and simple. Now, I do believe that now Zach Bagans is actually a producer for that show. He probably has more, input than when he first started, which he would really have no input. He would be doing what they wanted him to do. So I believe for camera's sake, over time, these investigators will, gradually do things that I don't think they necessarily wanted to do, but they did them so that they could keep their show. Because at that point it's income for them, and it's like, hey, your boss is asking you to do these things, so they kind of cave in and do them. That's my own personal opinion. Okay, I'm going to state that. Um, but I've thought about it a lot over the years. Uh, and I do think that when you're provoking spirits, especially in a location that has negative entities, negative spirits, something known that's demonic, that type of thing, I think it's asking for trouble. Okay. So thank you for spending today with me as we explored the side of paranormal investigating most people never see. These stories aren't entertainment. They're reminders that the unseen world comes with risk, and those risks don't disappear when the cameras shut off. Stay safe, stay curious, and whatever you do, don't follow the darkness home.